If voting in the midterms means Trump gets impeached, Schiff began. Then why are they the first ones screaming about it? The hearing room fell into the kind of silence only fear creates. It wasn't the silence of respect, nor of hesitation. It was the kind of quiet that suggests something undeniable had just been named. Not accused, named. A digital clock blinked overhead. 10:02 a.m. Oversight Committee emergency session. 3 MAGA figures sat under the lights like wax models forced to sweat. Pam Bondi shifted in her seat, slow and calculated. Kash Patel stared straight ahead. Matt Gaetz looked like he wanted to tweet something, but couldn't find the right emoji for panic. The screen above the dais flickered to life, playing back a segment from host Jason Gilbert. If you vote for Trump in 2024 but don't vote in the midterms, it's like you're voting to have him impeached. Schiff let the clip end in silence before speaking again, this time softer, but with the kind of weight that lands with finality. They're not warning voters, he said. They're warning themselves. Pam Bondi adjusted the microphone. With all due respect, Congressman, this hearing is a witch hunt looking for a headline. These accusations, they're speculation, not substance. But Robert Garcia leaned in, calm and cold. Then let's talk substance. Let's talk numbers. Let's talk Qatar. That name, Qatar, changed the temperature in the room. Bondi didn't flinch, but her jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Garcia didn't wait. You sold up to $5 million in Trump media stock, Pam. The same day Donald Trump announced a tariff expansion that caused the market to crash. And yet, you profited handsomely. Bondi barely blinked. I made a legal financial decision based on public information. Millions of Americans do the same. Millions of Americans, Schiff interjected, don't get paid $115,000 a month to represent a foreign monarchy. He clicked to the next slide, a contract showing her foreign agent registration with Qatar. And while we're at it, he continued, I seem to recall a certain quote from Donald Trump himself. The screen changed again, now playing footage from the 2016 presidential debate. These are people who kill women, who push gays off buildings. And yet you take their money. When the video stopped, Schiff didn't say anything. He just looked at her. The silence did more than any sound could have. Garcia spoke up again. Last week, Donald Trump posted footage of Qatari royals dancing in golden palaces. Americans can't afford rent or gas or homes. But the leader of your movement thinks this is what leadership looks like. Bondi opened her mouth, then closed it. Across the panel, Matt Gaetz scoffed. This is absurd. We're talking about Instagram videos now. Is that what congressional oversight has become? But Schiff was already flipping to the next slide, an image of campaign ads funded by MAGA groups, warning that if Republicans lose the midterms, Trump will face impeachment. Nobody in this room mentioned impeachment, he said, voice steady. You did, over and over. Your party said the quiet part out loud. His eyes scanned the table of witnesses. Which tells me something, he added. It tells me this isn't about partisanship. It's about fear. Fear that this time, the facts might actually stick. Fear that impeachment won't be symbolic. It'll be real. Garcia leaned back and smiled almost kindly. You can't outrun what you're already broadcasting to the nation. You're not defending a man. You're defending his panic. There was no gavel slam, no dramatic exit, just the kind of silence that felt like it might eventually echo. The slide flickered once before landing on a Stark table. SEC filing. Pamela Bondi, March 17, 2024. Sale of Trump media shares, $1 million to $5 million. Adam Schiff let the numbers speak for themselves at first. It's always interesting, he said, voice deliberate. When someone makes millions the same day, the market tanks. Even more interesting when that someone is sitting in a congressional hearing denying any connection. Pam Bondi didn't shift in her chair this time. She had trained for this. She had argued in front of cameras, reporters, juries, but she wasn't arguing now. She was holding the line. The trade was legal. Public shares, public market. I acted as any private citizen would. Schiff tapped the desk lightly. Your trade preceded a stock crash by hours. Not days, not weeks. Hours. Was it luck or coordination? Bondi tilted her chin upward. I don't answer insinuation. Robert Garcia leaned in, his voice so smooth it could have been mistaken for courtesy. Private citizens don't brief foreign governments. You were a registered foreign agent for Qatar. $115,000 a month. That number still sound familiar. Her lips tightened. No denial, no admission, just the space between the two. Garcia continued. So you represented a foreign monarchy, advised a U.S. president, and sold Insider Times stock in his media company, all in the same fiscal quarter. I followed every applicable law, she said, this time more measured, and I disclosed my activities through appropriate legal channels. Schiff didn't raise his voice. He just clicked the remote again. The next slide played video from a 2016 presidential debate. It was Donald Trump, frozen in the spotlight, makeup and menace. These are people who kill women, the clip began, who push gays off buildings. And yet you take their money. The room fell still again. Garcia folded his hands. Do you remember when that line made your party cheer? Bondi blinked, but said nothing. Schiff leaned forward, elbows on the desk, voice colder than the room. That was your candidate in 2016. He said that about Qatar and Saudi Arabia. So tell us, Miss Bondi, why do you take their money? No sound came from the witness table. Schiff repeated it, slower, not louder. Why do you take their money? Silence once again filled the space between the question and the answer that would never arrive. He leaned back, letting the silence work harder than any speech. The irony here isn't subtle. In fact, it's gold-plated. The committee chuckled, just enough to sting. Bondi's expression didn't change, but the pressure did. Garcia flipped to another image, a side-by-side of Bondi's sale date and Trump's tariff announcement. The same day, he said, and within 48 hours, the stock plummeted. Regular Americans lost millions in retirement. You walked away with a fortune. All legal, sure. All coincidental. Bondi finally spoke. I refuse to apologize for making sound financial decisions in accordance with the law. Schiff looked up, expression unchanged. And I refuse to pretend that coincidence justifies corruption. She stared back, but it wasn't the stare of someone in control. It was the look of someone calculating where to retreat. Garcia leaned forward. Let's talk about ethics, not law. Ethics. You were paid monthly by a foreign government. You sold stock days before American investors got crushed. And you advised a man preparing a third run for president. A pause. Which part of that story, he asked, sounds like America first? There was again that freeze-framed silence, like the moment after a lie unravels but before the consequence lands. Schiff didn't move. He just ended it, simply. You represented Qatar. You profited from Trump. And you never once warned the public. But don't worry. That silence is louder than you think. The next slide snapped into place with a crisp click, a scanned image of a consulting contract signed by Kash Patel, bearing the seal of the Qatari government and outlining a recurring monthly payment. $25,000 per installment, regular as clockwork. Schiff didn't bother raising his voice. The document spoke loudly enough. You were on a foreign payroll while embedded in national security infrastructure. He opened his mouth, then stopped. For a moment, his bravado slipped. Just a flicker, but enough. Care to explain how that works? Kash Patel scoffed. That document is fabricated. I serve the United States. Period. Schiff nodded, as if he'd expected the answer before the denial was even spoken. And yet, he said, the payments didn't fabricate themselves. He pushed forward the printed transaction records. They arrived in regular intervals. Same account. Same routing chain. Different months. Same name. Patel leaned forward. It's a smear campaign. You're chasing ghosts. Garcia cut in with precision. Ghosts don't sign wire transfer slips, and they certainly don't authorize policy terminations. Patel blinked. Garcia pressed. You removed the acting FEMA administrator after he refused to implement a MAGA directive to gut the AY's disaster response capabilities. That wasn't partisan. That was sabotage. That's a lie, Patel snapped. He was insubordinate. He refused to follow chain of command. He refused to let the federal government fail millions of Americans in hurricane season. Garcia shot back. That's what he refused. There was movement in the gallery. Journalists taking notes. Staffers exchanging glances. The air smelled like something shifting, like the narrative losing traction. Schiff leaned in again. You served under Trump and Qatar. That's not patriotism. That's auctioning your badge. Patel pointed a finger. I didn't auction anything. I sacrificed for this country. I served during the most hostile media environment in American history. And I'm sitting here now, getting crucified for a document you probably bought off a Telegram channel. Garcia raised an eyebrow. You were paid every 30 days by a foreign government. That's not persecution. That's payroll. And while we're here, Schiff added, let's talk about what else disappeared under your watch. Emergency infrastructure. FEMA's field response staff, cut by 30%. Hurricane tracking satellites, unfunded. Federal reserves, not replenished. Why? Patel didn't respond. Schiff didn't stop. Because Trump didn't want a federal agency reminding the public what actual competence looked like. He needed chaos. You delivered it, for Qatar, apparently. The screen shifted again, this time to footage from a recent town hall in Florida, where locals begged for FEMA support after storm forecasts showed a Category 4 system forming offshore. A woman's voice pleaded through a shaky video recording. They told us to call the state. The state said call FEMA. But FEMA said there's no one left to send. Garcia let that hang. So let's make it real, he said. A Category 4 storm is coming. The man who fired FEMA's leadership sits here claiming loyalty. And the man who paid him doesn't live here. Patel opened his mouth, then closed it. You want to talk about deep state? Garcia asked. Let's talk about deep pockets. The room was quiet again, but now it felt different, heavier. Schiff delivered the last line like a brick through glass. The badge you wore came with an oath. But that document came with a wire transfer. The chamber lights dimmed slightly as the screen behind the committee lit up again. Not with numbers or banking transactions, but with a photo, stark, overexposed, almost surreal, a 200-foot image of Donald Trump's face plastered on the side of a federal building in Washington, D.C. Robert Garcia leaned back in his chair, letting the image breathe. That's real, he said. Taken 2 days ago. Same poster went up on 3 other government buildings by sunrise. Kash Patel crossed his arms. It's branding. All presidents use messaging. Garcia didn't flinch. Most presidents don't install themselves on the skyline like a toothpaste ad. Patel's voice hardened. It's patriotic imagery. People miss strength. Schiff raised his eyebrows slightly. Patriotism doesn't come with a font size. Garcia clicked again. Another poster appeared, this one larger, with the phrase Trump 2028, still your president in bold chrome lettering. Can anyone explain, Garcia asked, why a private citizen who currently holds no office is being elevated like a monarch? Patel leaned forward. The people choose their icons. Garcia's tone sharpened. And cults carve theirs in marble. Schiff folded his hands. Symbols matter. In functioning democracies, leaders remind the public who's in charge. In collapsing ones, they remind the public who owns them. Garcia gestured to the next slide, a still frame of Trump standing at a military event in Doha, Qatar. He wore a red hat emblazoned with Trump 2028, sweat beading under fluorescent lights. American troops stood behind him, some smiling awkwardly, others stone-faced. He said this to service members overseas, Garcia explained, and I quote, "The hottest hat is Trump 2028. We won 3 elections. Some people want us to do a 4th. A beat." Schiff didn't say a word. He just stared at the image, at the soldiers' faces. The man didn't show up to this hearing, Garcia said, but his face showed up on the side of the Department of Transportation. Patel scoffed. That's a joke. You're reading into it. Schiff looked over calmly. Jokes don't require state buildings, Garcia continued, his voice laced with quiet sarcasm. We have rising inflation, measles outbreaks at airports, FEMA in collapse. And the person who wants to lead again is spray-painting campaign art on taxpayer property. He turned to Patel again. Is this leadership or set design? It's inspiration, Patel replied. It's obsession, Garcia countered. America deserves governance, not a recurring franchise. Another image flashed on screen. A digital billboard at Reagan National Airport looping a 15-second Trump video, ad on repeat. Gold jets, royal palaces, slow-motion flags waving behind the words. Trump never left. Schiff gave a thin smile. So, we're not just glamorizing dictatorship. We're importing aesthetic tips from the Middle East. Patel shifted in his chair. That's not what this is. Schiff didn't move. That's exactly what this is. Posture without policy. Spectacle without structure. Trump's out there promising strength while hollowing every institution built to deliver it. The screen behind them played another clip. Trump again in Qatar, grinning under a spotlight, sweat glistening beneath the brim of his red hat. Can I tell you what's hot? His voice crackled through the speakers. These hats that say Trump 2028, that's so hot right now. Garcia raised his hand slightly. That was said in front of uniformed troops, who stood there silent. Some laughed awkwardly. Most just stood. Patel rolled his eyes. It was a joke. Garcia didn't smile. So it was January 6th until the barricades fell. There was no rebuttal this time. Schiff leaned forward for the closing line. His voice was quiet but surgical. Democracies do not fall with explosions. They wither under posters no one questioned, jokes no one laughed at, and faces that stayed on walls long after the voters walked away. The next image on the screen didn't come with a contract or a number. It was a tweet, just a white background, black letters, time-stamped, the kind of thing most people scroll past. But here, under oath, it landed like a punch. James Comey's post, 8647. Matt Gaetz leaned forward before anyone spoke. This is a threat, a coded message to assassinate Donald Trump. His voice rang loud across the room, like he'd been waiting to say it for days. He wasn't asking a question. He was drawing a sword. You all know what 86 means, he said. It's restaurant slang, military slang, street slang. It means eliminate, kill. And 47? That's President 47. That's Donald Trump. This is incitement, plain and simple. Schiff remained calm. Interesting that you translate slang with such confidence, Congressman. It's basic. Gaetz snapped. It's common knowledge. Garcia smirked, tilting his head slightly. Is it also common knowledge that you tweeted, and I quote, "We've now 86 McCarthy, McDaniel, McConnell"? A pause. The room shifted. You called it a celebration, Garcia continued. Said it was a cleansing moment for the party. That's different, Gaetz barked. Of course it is, Garcia said dryly. Because when you do it, it's strategy. When someone else does it, it's sabotage. Schiff leaned into the mic, voice low but firm. Projection isn't defense, it's confession. Gaetz shook his head. Comey was the FBI director. His words carry weight. Schiff's tone hardened. And you were an elected member of Congress when you cheered the political death of 3 of your own party's leaders in one sentence. Words carry weight both ways, Garcia added. And for someone concerned about assassination metaphors, you sure throw gasoline on enough bonfires. I stand by my words, Gaetz said. But his PAC filings from last month told a different story. An unreported donation from a lobbying group, now under Qatari control. Good, Garcia replied, because they're hanging in the Library of Congress now. On the screen, the tweet remained. 8647. Simple, stark, stripped of context, waiting for meaning. It mirrored the rhetoric MAGA had long played with, flirting with violent imagery, then feigning outrage when others returned the same energy. This is the problem, Schiff said. You've built a movement on menace, on symbols that edge toward the unspoken, on slogans that wink at danger. Garcia followed up, sharp and steady. Then when someone else dares to use your vocabulary, suddenly it's criminal. Not because it's dangerous, but because it's yours. Gaetz folded his arms. You don't know what that post was meant to say. And yet, Garcia countered, you were the first to assign it lethal intent. Schiff turned to the room. They don't want accountability. They want a monopoly on language, on anger, on fear. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It carried weight, heavy with the sound of hypocrisy unraveling under fluorescent lights. He didn't walk through the hearing room doors. He didn't sit at the witness table. But Donald Trump, every ounce of him, was present. In the grainy clip looping on the screen, he stood next to golf royalty, hands in motion, laughing at a joke no one in the room could hear. Behind him, golden chairs, imported carpets, champagne bottles catching chandelier light like weapons of indulgence. It looked less like diplomacy and more like surrender, not to an enemy, but to a lifestyle that answered no questions and left no fingerprints. Robert Garcia tapped the remote, freezing the frame. While this committee asked for testimony, he said, Donald Trump gave us a video postcard from a palace. While we reviewed financial corruption and foreign influence, he posed in borrowed thrones. Kash Patel exhaled hard. It was a courtesy visit. Every former president maintains international ties. Garcia grinned. Yes. Most don't conduct state cosplay on behalf of countries they once condemned as sponsors of extremism. Another tap. New slide. A still from a canceled summit in Ankara. The chairs were labeled Putin, Zelensky, and a third now blank. Its placard removed, the flag holder empty. Garcia didn't need to narrate. The absence said everything. While Zelensky showed up under missile fire, Schiff said quietly, Trump stayed home, then flew to a place where no hard questions followed him. Patel tried again. There was no obligation for him to attend. But there was an opportunity, Garcia said, and like so many others, he traded it for stage lights and silence. The next image rolled in without warning. This time, a building permit issued in Belgrade, or rather a forged version of it. The permit's author had already confessed. No inspection had occurred. No approval had been granted. And yet, construction had begun on a luxury, Trump-branded hotel. Garcia didn't raise his voice. This is the future he believes in. One without codes, oversight, or consequences. Just signatures, even if they're fake. A long pause. Schiff spoke as if the weight of the past 6 hours sat in his chest. He didn't show up here today, but he showed up in Doha, in posters, in jet deals, in silence. He let each word fall like stone. The silence in the chamber was no longer awkward. It was clarifying. He's terrified, Schiff added. Not of impeachment, but of what impeachment reveals. Patel scoffed. That's dramatic nonsense. Schiff turned to him. Then give us an alternative. What does it look like when a man who has nothing to fear skips a hearing, flies across the world, poses with princes, hides from summits, and signs fake papers in foreign capitals? Garcia folded his hands. It looks like fear, the public kind, the desperate kind. The final image lingered, a black and white shot of Trump exiting a plane in Qatar, waving, foreign security around him. Not a single American aide in sight. Schiff looked up. When leaders are proud, they walk through front doors. They answer questions. They testify. Garcia nodded. When they're terrified, they vanish and leave their shadows to testify in their place. Adam Schiff stood without raising his voice. He didn't have to. The facts had spoken louder than any volume ever could. What we've heard today, he began, wasn't merely a defense of political strategy. It was a confession, delivered in half-denials, in evasions, in the unbearable weight of silence. He looked across the chamber, now drained of its earlier tension. There was no shouting left, no bravado, just 3 faces. Bondi, Patel, Gates, each sinking in their own private quicksand, held together only by the same suit of arrogance that had once made them loud. Trump didn't testify, Schiff continued, but everything around him did. The jet deals, the ghost hotels, the posters, the payrolls, they're all statements. And unlike Trump, they never stopped talking. Garcia leaned in, his tone sharper, clearer, like he was holding a mirror, not a microphone. They said impeachment was political, as if corruption were a partisan color. But let's be clear, impeachment is not revenge. It's repair. And right now, this democracy is leaking from wounds MAGA won't even admit exist. He paused, letting the silence stretch. You can't cure a rot if you refuse to name it, he added. And what we've uncovered here isn't a crack. It's a collapse. The final slide appeared behind them, a still from earlier in the hearing. Bondi, head bowed, hands clenched. Patel, eyes vacant, lips pressed into denial. Gates, arms crossed like armor, but eyes darting like a man who couldn't find the exit. No audio, just motionless defeat. Every one of them, Schiff said, came in here prepared to fight. But the moment the documents spoke, they fell silent, because the truth has a way of dissolving bluster. Garcia stood not as a performer, but as a witness. We watched power blink today. It didn't scream. It didn't storm out. It just stopped speaking. And that silence said everything. A video began playing, subtitled for those who hadn't heard it yet. Trump in Qatar. The hottest hat says Trump 2028. People are begging us for a fourth term. Then a clip of Zelensky walking in a flak jacket through smoke in Kyiv. Then the Forge Hotel permit from Belgrade. Then the FEMA email reading. No units available for coastal response. And finally, the word Schiff had whispered once, now written across the screen. You don't need Trump to testify to fill his fear. You just need to look at his surrogates and how fast they stop talking. By noon the next day, that clip had reached 30 million views. By sunset, 2 members of Congress had called for Bondi and Patel to be subpoenaed in a separate DOJ probe. Gates posted nothing. The Capitol that night stood quieter than usual, but inside the silence, something had shifted. Not vengeance, not victory, just the clean, unblinking presence of truth, finally unshaved.